Grüß, willkommen in einem neuen video. Welcome to another exciting video. In this case, episode 8 of my equipment series of videos. This video will be covering Polish armoured fighting vehicles and how they were deployed. I'll make no attempt to pronounce Polish and will translate everything into English, as my ability to correctly pronounce Polish words is extremely limited. My profuse apologies to Polish speakers. This shows the Polish Army's order of battle on the 1st of September 1939. This comes from the excellent Blitzkrieg Armour Camouflage and Markings 1939 and 1940 by Stephen J. Zaloga. I would encourage anyone interested in the period to get a copy. It's an excellent book full of useful data. The Polish formations, starting with company level, are independent scout tank companies, light tank companies, and armoured troops. At battalion level, the Polish field light tank battalions, or the fielded light tank battalions, and they possess 2 mechanised brigades. The first Polish armoured fighting vehicles, which I'll be covering, are the armoured cars, most of which were allocated to the cavalry brigades and in one of the mechanised brigades. In 1920, 18 Peugeots were provided to Poland for use against the Soviets in the Polish-Soviet War. By the early 1930s, this type was considered obsolete and were replaced in Polish Army service, although the type continued in service with the police. There were 2 versions, this one armed with a machine gun. The second version was the Peugeot autocannon version, armed with a 37mm Hotchkiss M1887 gun. The 2 armaments were interchangeable and were mounted on a pivot mount fitted with a curved gun shield. The main production model of the Peugeot armoured car was built on the Peugeot 18CV Type 146 or Type 148 chassis. The Peugeot armoured car had a front-mounted engine, driver in the middle, and open-top fighting compartment at the rear. 3 remained in service in September 1939, seeing combat against the invading German forces. Szanowni Państwo WZ-28, and my apologies to my Polish speakers, or Polish speakers on this video. This literally means armoured car, year 1928 model. It was a Polish armoured car of the 1920s, based on the French-built Citroën Crégras B2 10CV half-track chassis. The vehicle became the standard armoured car of the Polish Army. There were 2 versions. This one was armed with a 37mm gun. The second version of the WZ-28 was armed with the CKM WZ-25 Hotchkiss machine gun. When the WZ-28 armoured car was introduced, it was discovered the vehicle had a low speed and problems with reliability. In 1933, it was decided to return the completed WZ-28 armoured cars to the factory and rebuild them as all-wheeled WZ-34s. By 1939, all but a handful, 3 or 4, were converted to the WZ-34 armoured cars, the wheeled version. The remainder remained in training centres. It's assumed the remaining 2, 3 or 4 were used against the Germans in 1939. The armoured car WZ-29, commonly known as the Ursus or CWS, was a Polish interwar heavy armoured car. The initial armament consisted of the French 37mm low-velocity gun in the turret front, 7.92mm machine guns in the turret left rear and right rear at 120 degrees to the gun, all operated by the commander, and another 7.92mm machine gun in the hull rear, operated by the rear gunner. Some sources I've seen indicate the 37mm gun was removed, with only a turret machine gun remaining. I'm uncertain if this vehicle existed, and this may have been the version which had one of the machine guns in the turret removed, which occurred in the mid-1930s. In the original version, the commander had too many weapons to operate, so removing one machine gun was implemented. The WZ-29 armoured car was designed in 1929. The vehicle was based on the chassis of the Ursus A 2-ton truck, and the armoured body was built by CWS Warsaw. Note how the main armament looks like it's a machine gun. If you look at the rear of the turret, you can see the 37mm gun. This may be the reason why some sources talk about a machine gun armed version of this vehicle. The WZ-29 armoured cars were used in the armoured troops of 1 cavalry brigade, which consisted of 8 armoured cars. The armoured car WZ-34 was a standard light armoured car used by the Polish Army during the September campaign of 1939. The cars were built in a number of versions with different engines and slightly different armoured plates. The final version was armed with either the 7.92mm CKM WZ-25 Hotchkiss machine gun, and the other was, well, we'll cover later. This is a stage photo of one of the machine gun armed WZ-34 armoured cars. The second version was armed with a short-barreled 37mm Putex SA-18 gun. Production of this armoured car ended in 1938. The last version of the armoured car was accepted for service in 1935. By 1939, at the outbreak of the Second World War, the car was obsolete but was still in use. All Polish cavalry brigades had organic armoured cars companies made up of 8 armoured cars and 13 tankettes. In 10 out of the 11 Polish cavalry brigades, the WZ-34 was used. Most of the WZ-34 armoured cars were used in the armoured troops of the cavalry brigade, with 10 brigades equipped with WZ-34s for a total of 80 armoured cars. It's unknown where the other WZ-34s were deployed. The Warsaw Mechanised Brigade consisted of a reconnaissance battalion, which had an armoured car company consisting of 7 armoured cars. It's unknown what type of armoured car was used in this formation, but may well have been either the WZ-34, most likely, or the 29, or possibly even an older armoured car, which is probably unlikely. That covers all the armoured cars. Now we'll be looking at another vehicle that was common in the Polish army, the tankettes. The TK, also commonly known as the TK3 tankette, was a Polish design produced from 1939 based on the chassis of the British Carden Lloyd tankette. The TK3 was produced from 1931 and about 280 were built. It used the Ford A engine. 3 of the armoured troops of the cavalry brigade were equipped with TK3 tankettes, each of which had 12 vehicles. 9 independent scout tank companies were equipped with the TK3 tankettes. These were normally attached to infantry divisions. 575 TK or TKS tankettes formed the bulk of the Polish armoured forces before the outbreak of war. They suffered heavy losses during the invasion of Poland, often being the only fighting vehicles available. The other TK variety, the TKF tankette, with a 45 horsepower Polski Fiat engine and new suspension, were built in the number of 18, or 18 were built, TKFs. The TKF was an interim model designed to test new engines and suspensions with the following version, which the following versions of the TK series took advantage of. The next version, the TKS, was an improved model produced from 1933. About 260 were built and consisted of a new hull, new suspension, and it used the Polski Fiat engine. The TKS was the most modern and numerous of the Polish tankettes, and a number must have been restored. Apparently they were very enjoyable to drive around in, as you can see with this restored version. 8 of the cavalry brigade armoured troops were equipped with the updated TKS tankettes with 12 vehicles in each armoured troop. 10 of the independent scout tank companies were equipped with the updated TKS tankette. Each company comprised of 13 vehicles. When the Warsaw Mechanised Brigade was formed, 2 scout tank companies were added. It's possible these were newly formed, specifically formed or attached independent scout tank companies. I'm uncertain, and they could well have been equipped with TKSs. The 10th Polish Mechanised Brigade consisted of a single scout tank company consisting of a mix of TKSs and TKF tankettes. This was possibly created after the German invasion, or it may have been one of the independent scout tank companies. I'm kind of uncertain of this. In 1939, up-armouring of the tankette with the NKM WZ-38 FK 20mm machine gun, or light cannon, began, but only 24 of these were completed before the outbreak of World War II. The TKS with the NKM WZ-38 FK 20mm gun, of which about 24 TKSs were fitted with, was a surprisingly effective tank destroyer. One scout tank company, part of the 10th Polish Mechanised Brigade, was equipped with 4 20mm armed TKS tankettes. These were normally mixed in with the machine gun armed TKS tankettes, who supported the TKS/20, that's the TKSs with the 20mm gun, as a tank destroyer. It's possible some of the other scout companies were armed in a similar manner. There was sufficient TKS/20s, that is, tankettes armed with a 20mm gun, to equip 6 of such companies. The next later version of the TK series was the TKW. Now, the TKW was based on the TK3 chassis, but instead of possessing a fixed weapon, this was mounted in a turret. 6 of these tanks, or tankettes, were converted from old TK tankettes, or TK3 tankettes, same vehicle, and possibly a further 6 were also built from scratch. It did not prove successful, as it was too top-heavy and was difficult to communicate between the crews. It was also proposed that the 20mm cannon would be used in the TKW tankette. However, it's unlikely they were ever built, or any were ever built. This shows one of the prototype TKW tankettes with no main armaments. It's postulated different weapons were being tested on this chassis. That finishes up with the tankettes. The next type of armoured fighting vehicle that we'll be covering are the light tanks, most of which, or all of which, are of foreign design. The Renault FT was a French light tank. There were a number of different versions, but the first main version was a Char Militaires, which was an FT with an 8mm Hotchkiss M1914 machine gun. About 2 to 5 of these tanks were ordered, and about 3 to 5 of these tanks produced. This picture shows an FT-17 armed with an MG in Polish service. The French formed the Polish Light Tank Regiment in France in 1919, consisting of 120 FT-17s. It was then shipped with all equipment to Poland. 45 were armed with the 8mm machine gun. The Char cannon was an FT with a 37mm Putex SA-18 short-barrel gun. About 3 to 5 of these tanks were ordered, and about 1 to 3 of the tanks were actually produced and shipped to Poland. This constituted the bulk of the Polish FT force. 75 were bought over from France in 1990, and a possible further 24 may have been purchased in the 1930s. The Polish had 45 of these FT tanks in its 10th Mechanised Brigade, which is assumed to be armed with the 37mm gun. A total of 75 FT-17s armed with the 37mm gun was sent to Poland in 1919. Additional FT-17s were purchased from France in 1924, although these were all command vehicles. The Polish built 24 FT-17s in 1926, but these were mainly used for training. The Polish did sell some of their FT-17s and sent some to Spain. The FT-17s were organised into light tank companies, the 111th, 112th and 113th, of which these 3 comprised a light tank battalion. Each company consisted of 3 platoons with 3 FT-17s with 37mm gun, 2 FT-17s with machine guns. This formation is not in the formal structure of the 10th Mechanised Brigade on September 1939, so it's unknown where it was at this point in time. There were 107 FT-17s in Polish service in September, so a second battalion is possible. Originally, the FT-17s were organised into the 1st Tank Regiment, which comprised of 5 companies, but this must have changed by October 39, as they were deployed independently at company level. Another source shows the FT-17s were organised into an independent battalion. The Polish army still had 102 light tanks, FT-17s. Of those, 70 in the 2nd Armoured Battalion in Zawadzki and 32 in 2 armoured train units. The Vickers 6-ton tank, or Vickers Mark E, was a British light tank. The Type A had 2 turrets, each mounting a Vickers machine gun. Poland purchased 38 Vickers Mark E Type A's with spare parts and a manufacturing licence. The Vickers light tanks were organised into 2 light tank companies, the 12th and the 121st. The types are unknown, but it's reasonable to assume the 121st used the Type A and may have been used in defence of Warsaw. The Vickers Type B was a single 2-man turret mounting a single machine gun and a short-barrel 47mm OQF 3-pounder gun. The Polish purchased 50 Type Bs, which were to be assembled, but not all were assembled, and those not assembled were used for spare parts and the development of the 7TP light tank. The tanks were in bad shape by 1939 because they were used in training units over a period of 5 years. However, they did perform well and better than the Renault R35, amongst others, as part of the Polish 10th Cavalry Brigade during the invasion of Poland in 1939. The Vickers light tanks were organised into two light tank companies, the 12th and 121st, as we've mentioned. The exact types between the different formations were unknown, but it's reasonable to assume that the 21st used the Type B, which was part of the 10th Mechanised Brigade. Another possibility were the platoons may be organised in the same manner as the FT-17s, with 3 Vickers with 47mm and 2 with machine guns. On the other hand, we know the Polish considered the twin turret configuration as inferior, so I'm not sure if this is viable. The Renault R35 was a French light tank of the Second World War. It was armed with a 37mm gun, which proved able to penetrate the armour of the German light tanks, but generally not the medium tanks from the front. As the threat of war became apparent and the production rate of Polish 7TP tanks were insufficient, it was decided to buy vehicles abroad. In April 1939, it was finally decided to buy 100 R35 tanks as an emergency measure. The first shipment of 50, some sources lower this to 49, arrived in Poland in July 1939, along with 3 Hotchkiss H-35 tanks brought for testing. In August, they were mostly put in service with the 12th Armoured Battalion. At the beginning of the invasion of Poland, 45 or possibly 46 tanks formed the core of the newly created 21st Light Tank Battalion that was part of the General Reserve of the Commander-in-Chief. This consisted of R35 tanks, light tanks. I have been a bit creative in my classification of medium tanks, including the 7TP here. While the Polish call this a light tank, it was equivalent to the early Panzer IIIs, so I'm going to class this as a medium tank. The 7TP, 7-ton Polish light tank, was a Polish development of the Vickers British 6-ton Mark E tank licence. Like its British predecessor, the 7TP was initially produced in 2 variants. The first was the twin-turret version, armed with 2 CKM WZ-30 machine guns. After initial testing, it became clear that the twin-turret variety was obsolete and lacked firepower, so it was abandoned in favour of the more modern single-turret design. Prior to the outbreak of World War II, most of the twin-turret tanks were converted to single-turret versions, that's the 7TP, and only 24 twin-turret types remained in Polish service. As an emergency measure, the twin-turret 7TPs were organised into 2 companies, of which the first company consisted of 11 twin-turret 7TP tanks, as well as a few other vehicles. It's unknown what the strength of the other company was, but it's safe to assume it consisted of a similar number of vehicles. It's possible the intended organisation was 2 companies of 12 tanks each. The main production version of the 7TP was armed with a 37mm Bofors WZ-34 or 37 gun, of which 108 were produced or converted. Most of the 7TPs were organised into the 1st and 2nd Light Tank Battalions, which accounted for 96 vehicles. It's possible there may have been an independent company of 12 tanks as well, which would account for all 7TP vehicles. This company could have been used in the Warsaw Mechanised Brigade. In 1938, local Polish companies produced 13 prototype models of a better armoured version of the 7TP, the 9TP. Although the 9TP never entered production, these prototypes were used in the defence of Warsaw in 1939. It's assumed they were organised into a single company, which may have been part of the Warsaw Mechanised Brigade. Most of the 7TPs were organised into 2 battalions, the 1st and 2nd, each consisting of 49 tanks. At least 1 battalion joined the 10th Mechanised Brigade and the other the Warsaw Mechanised Brigade. This was only after they suffered losses, and they were not attached to these formations at the beginning of the German invasion. This attachment was basically an emergency attachment. The 10TP was a Polish light cruiser tank that never left the prototype status. While advancing the Polish armour development program, the prototype was deemed unsatisfactory or unsuccessful. The 10TP prototype itself was an original design implementing some general ideas suggested by John Walter Christie, but also many new technical solutions. The 14TP, and the 14 represents its weight, it's a 14-ton Polish tank, was a Polish medium cruiser tank that was never completed due to the onset of World War II. That finishes off my medium tank section. Now I'm going to be looking at other vehicles. Starting with the assault gun. The Polish began to experiment with assault guns specifically to support their tankette companies. While these were never produced in any number, an experimental platoon was formed which did see action during the German invasion. The TKD was a self-propelled gun mounting the 47mm infantry gun. It was effectively an assault gun. That was the original intention. Only one platoon of 4 TKDs were formed, which was considered as combat ready but used for testing and trial purposes only. It's possible 2 such vehicles were allocated to the Warsaw Mechanised Brigade. It's unknown what occurred with the other 2 vehicles. This vehicle was supposed to be distributed to the armoured troops, which were part of the cavalry brigades, possibly a platoon of 4 vehicles in each troop. In practice, it's possible they would have been distributed in the same manner as the TKS-20, that is the 20mm gun-armed TKS. While tracked tractors are not armoured fighting vehicles, I thought I would add them in this video because they are rather interesting. The Polish had an unusual focus on tracked tractors, possibly due to the poor quality roads in Poland. The S6e08 was a Polish light artillery tractor designed in the 1930s. It was a basic tractor, or the basic tractor of the Polish anti-aircraft artillery during 1939. It was designed to tow the 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft gun, but could also tow other light and medium artillery used by the Polish army, such as the modernised 75mm Schneider gun and the 100mm Skoda howitzer. The origins of the design can be traced back to the Kardan-Neuden tankette of the 1920s. The artillery tractor C2P was based on a modified chassis of the TKS tankette, with which it shared many components with. The half-track WZ-34 was a Polish half-track lorry. It was produced in a variety of variants, the best known of them being the C4P artillery tractor used by the Polish army in the period before World War II. The vehicle was based on the 2.5-ton Fiat 621 truck, license built by Polski Fiat in Poland at the time. The vehicle entered production at the PZNZ Przewozki factory in 1935, and the production run lasted until 1938. Although some 400 were built in all variants, including roughly 80 artillery tractors. The WZ-34C4P was delivered in at least 8 different variants, 3 of which were designed or designated as tractors. C4P for heavy artillery, intended for 120mm WZ-1878/9/31 guns, experimentally also for the 155mm howitzer and the 105mm WZ-29 Schneider guns, that is, towing all these weapons. The C4P was also used for light artillery, intended for the 75mm Schneider gun and the 100mm Skoda howitzers. The C4P was also intended for anti-aircraft artillery towing, intended as the basic tractor for the Polish 75mm WZ-36 Star AA gun. The C7P, 7-ton Polish tractor, was a Polish tracked artillery tractor. The C7P shared many parts with a 7TP light tank, produced simultaneously. In fact, the chassis was almost a direct copy of the tank, while the superstructure was partially borrowed from a licensed-build Sora bus. In 1934, production started of this rather large tractor. Out of approximately 350 ordered, only 151 were built by the outbreak of World War II. Approximately 108 were deployed to the artillery units, where the C7P was used as an artillery tractor in the regiments of the heaviest artillery, mainly for towing the heavy 220 WZ-32 Skoda mortars. An additional 18 tractors were attached to various tank units, mostly the Polish 10th Motorised Cavalry Brigade, for towing of immobilised tanks and for transport of tanks to the battlefield on specially designed towing platforms. And so this completes my episode 8 of my video on the Polish armoured fighting vehicles of World War II. I have no doubt I shall be upgrading this video in the future as I obtain new source material. I've posted some of the source material I have in the URL shown in the image. Denken Sie daran, immer voll Heil, Hamilton so kämpfen!